Blog Talk Radio. Greetings and welcome to the Sales Sense Reality Talk Show with your host, Mike Krause. Mike has sold over $100 million in sales and offers Fortune 500 strategies, tactics, and tools to sales professionals and business leaders. He created this show with one thing in mind, for sales professionals to share their secrets with each other. Join us every Wednesday at 12 to 12:30 Eastern Time, or sign up for updates on Mike's mailing list at salessensesolutions.com. Mike appreciates you listening and wishes you good luck on your next sales call.
Well, welcome. It's Mike Krause with Sales Sense Solutions. Hope everyone's having a great day. I have a special show here that's off our regular session, and that's with Art Fromm from Technical Sales Development. And we're going to have a discussion on the benefits of using webinars and why everyone's doing it, what's it worth considering, how to get started, how to jump in. So Art is the expert in this, and he's traveled all over the world helping companies reduce costs, increase efficiencies by using a webinar tool. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Art Fromm from Technical Sales Development. Art, how are you today?
Good, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yes, I'm excited to have you. You know, time is money and money is time, and we all know that in sales, and it's important to maximize the productivity. We don't want to be driving 3 hours to an appointment, and then all of a sudden that appointment's not there, and we drive all the way back, so we've blown a whole day. And I think one of the major benefits, but I'm excited to learn more from you, the expert, is the use of webinars and really what's the benefits besides the time. And so I'm excited. Tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself and your background and go from there.
Sure, yep. I've been involved with sales and sales management positions for 20-some-odd years, and the last 9 years been focused on sales development, so primarily delivering training to sales teams to help them become more consultative and to change behavior so that they can go through sales transformations. And as a result of that, I've been, of course, doing a lot of traditional in-person training in the past, and what I've seen over the last 2 years for sure is a big increase in the demand for and the need to be able to deliver training and other types of presentations in a virtual format, which is what we call the webinars. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, is just to give you some insights. If you're starting out, if you're considering webinars, if you're not really sure where to get started or you've got concerns, we will address a number of those things in the next 27 or so minutes here.
Sounds good. You know, just to kick it off, you know, who is using a webinar today? You know, I guess who can use the webinar?
Yeah, well, it's pretty amazing because almost anybody that has information to deliver to somebody else can potentially use webinars. So you've definitely got training organizations is probably the biggest one that comes to mind, as well as any type of marketing or product development type group where they're trying to get the word out to people. Definitely salespeople, as you said, can use it for presenting to or having a discussion with the customer, where it's not just a phone conference call, but you can show things over the internet, such as a presentation or other things like that. And even people are using it, customer service departments and others like that are doing it to help out their customers to learn about their products more or even give some hands-on experience.
Absolutely. What, besides the sales and marketing people and they're engaging in it, what are they using it for? What are the primary things that you see them out there using the webinar for?
Well, training groups, for example, and that could be any training group, either whether it's HR themselves or anybody within sales or other groups that do training, could use it internally to train their employees or externally to train customers. The other things that we're commonly seeing this used for is the sales presentation type format like we talked about, new product announcements. Demonstrations is a big one. So if you are a high-tech company and you've got software, instead of packing up the laptop and flying or driving somewhere to do a demonstration, you could do that over the internet with the webinar as well. And even there's some capabilities for some hands-on type training where you can try something remotely instead of going there. I know that we've had some interest lately from some people that do like travel agencies or catering type business and things like that, where they want to get the word out and maybe hold a webinar to educate people about what travel options are available or what different types of services they provide. So that's another way. Kind of advertising might be another way to use it.
Absolutely, it's like a general info, like an infomercial session.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was at Ceridian, we were selling to CFOs of 5,000 employees and above, and we always had one every month. So it's such a great, powerful sales tool. For example, if Art, it's just not a good time for us to meet, I would just close it out by, Art, I can definitely appreciate you're busy right now, but we do have a 30-minute webinar each month. Let me send you a quick invite, and I'd love to have you on it with one of our tax professionals, and it's informational only. It's not sales in nature, and I'd love to have you on that. And 9 out of 10 times they said, sure. And then we're just moving that prospect through the sales process by just an information-only webinar. It's such a powerful tool. It really is. Talk a little bit more about the training, external and internal. What are some things that you see that people are using that for?
Well, in terms of specifically some of the benefits that people are seeing is that, as a presenter or a company that wants to do webinars, what it's going to help you with is definitely reducing travel time, because you literally don't have to go to the airport or get in your car to go have a meeting. You could do it right from the comfort of your own office or home office, which is in my case. I broadcast live from Western New York all around the world from my home office. Definitely reduces travel expenses. I know personally my experience with this is that last year I went to Asia Pac at the beginning of the year like 5 times, and that consumed over 7 weeks of my time where I was away from home and I was away from my office. I delivered maybe, I think, a total of about 10 sessions. So if you think about that, that's about 280 working hours that I was away from the office. Now, this year, because everything's been more webinar focused, just to give an example of the type of time and travel savings, I didn't have to travel to deliver probably twice as many sessions in the same period of time. That probably saved at least $20,000 or more of travel for the clients that I was working with. And for me, it cut down the amount of time that I had to invest to actually go somewhere and be away from home and be away from family and work and all that, from about 280 hours down to only about 40 total hours that I had to invest. So I saved literally 6 working weeks worth of time by being able to just get on the internet, do the webinar, and be able to reach these folks around the world. So it also extends your reach because of the fact that you can do more in less time. It is a global reach where literally you can have people from anywhere involved with it. And if you're a high-tech company at all, it can add credibility to the perception people have of you, because they expect you to be using the higher tech tools and things like that. So it can really help you be a thought leader. In terms of the audience, again, some of the same benefits are available. The salespeople that I was training on these sessions didn't have to travel anywhere to be able to participate. So it reduced those clients, the participants' travel expenses and their time away from the office, which is key. As we know, it's one thing to justify the training and all that and even the time in the workshop, but then being away from the office for the travel time is a big deal. So it reduces the time out of the field for the participants. And frankly, it's more exciting than just a con call. So like you said, once a month you could have a conference call making some new announcement, but it's kind of just listening to somebody's voice isn't necessarily that exciting. Adding a webinar to it is good, because a lot of times you got visual learners out there that need something they can see along with what they hear, and that can really help drive the point home.
Absolutely, and I think one thing too as well is you can increase your touches. So maybe instead of doing a two-day training seminar back to back, and frankly, I know I'll speak for myself. I'm exhausted after 8 hours of sitting in a room training, and maybe you can sprinkle that over a couple of weeks and retain more information and have people a little bit more highly tuned in on a webinar versus a seminar. Plus, you're also if for salespeople on the call right now, if let's say, for example, you're on a $1 million quota, well, that's $20,000 a week that you need to be producing. If you're taking 5 days out of the field, they're not going to reduce your quota to $9.8 million because you were in training one week. Now you got to make that up as well. So I just think webinars are just a win-win for the sales professional out there. That's for sure. Besides the travel time and expenses and the working out of the field, what are some other benefits, and what kind of sessions do you do here?
Well, there's webinars can be used for a lot of different things, and I recognize that on this call and listening to this recording, we could have everybody from somebody that has maybe touches with just 1 or 2 people, all the way up to perhaps people that are trying to give presentations or would like to give presentations to hundreds of people. So there's a couple of different ways of looking at this, especially if you're getting started, just to think about, what's the end that you have in mind? What is your goal that you're trying to do? And then that can help you with things like, okay, what tool do I use? How do I get started? And what are some of the ramifications of moving to the webinar format? So I'd like to divide this up into maybe 2 chunks of discussion, Mike, is a little bit about the types of webinars and then a little bit about the size and some considerations to take into account there. Starting with the different types of webinars, if you're in marketing or if you're doing product presentations or if you've got a general presentation you want to give, like a monthly update that we were referencing earlier, that's what we would call probably mainly a broadcast type of presentation. It's probably the one that's most typically associated with webinars. It's frankly in some ways the easiest to do because it's very similar to the con call, but it has slides that are added to it. So it's usually a 1 to very many in terms of broadcasting or just kind of pushing information out. Another one, sort of on the other end of the spectrum, is more of like a hands-on lab. So if you're selling anything that requires somebody to try a software or try an application, that can be very expensive with setting things up. So the webinar tools these days allow you to do screen sharing or application sharing. You can literally pass control over to the participants. So it's just like they're in a conference room pilot, if you will, or a trial environment, but they are doing it remotely, and you're able to see what they're doing, and you're able to help coach them through that. And then another one that's really common for sales folks, especially technical sales folks, sales engineers and such, would be demonstrations, right? So being able to give a demo to a prospective customer over the internet is much easier in terms of travel and all that than if you were to do it in person. So definitely demonstrations can be done as well. But I want to put a caveat on these things. All of these things need to be thought of, and we'll cover this at the end of the call. All these need to be thought of as something that has to be purposely designed with interactions and things like that to make sure the audience is engaged. So it can't just be blindly done. It's just not trivial to do these, but it's not real difficult either. It's something that has to be thought through. Another just couple quick types on the classroom environment. And again, I know some of you are doing sales, and this might not directly apply, but still some good concepts to think about. If you're trying to transfer knowledge, if you're trying to change behavior, if you're trying to do things that your participants are required to really understand well, I'm talking about more than just an annual report, but where they have to do certain behaviors, then that falls into the classification we would call virtual classroom or virtual training. And there's a couple different ways of looking at this. One is you could train a large group of people at the same time, and if that's the case, usually, just like on this radio broadcast, we have some participants that are live with us, but they're on mute because, we don't want to hear the background noise and all that stuff. And if they have a question, they can flag us and they can jump in and we can have them participate. Those are the types of things that you would do in a larger training setting. But you can very effectively measure training by getting some audience participation through polling or asking questions, other methods that the webinar tool provides to give that feedback, and you can track that and measure it. If you're doing more of a small group, and by that I say training to what would typically be an instructor-led size class, so maybe 12, 15, maybe up to 18 people. That gives you the opportunity to open up the microphones and have more dialogue and discussion and really get to engage directly with the participants so that they feel like, other than the fact that they're remote, by all senses they're directly involved with the presentation. So it's more emulating that in-person training. For that, you would still use a lot of the same type of tools like polling and all that stuff, but you can also do some shout-outs. Like what I like doing in a small group environment with the phones open is, I'll call out and say, hey, Mike, you there? And I make sure I get your attention, and then I'll ask you a question. And as soon as people know that questions are going to be asked of them, they pay attention more, and they tend to be more engaged, because the big challenge with webinars is people being off doing, email or other things like that. So that small group training environment is very possible. I have done it extremely effectively, and it is something that should be considered by anybody who's doing any type of training, because it really can replicate, and in some cases even be better than in person. I'll give you a quick example. I have done a lot of workshops for Asia and Asia Pacific, and as you know, there's language challenges in many cases where if you're in person with somebody, they may be just culturally reluctant to ask or answer a question. If you try to throw an open-ended question out there, you won't get very many volunteers. What I found interesting was through webinars, I was able to increase that participation because there's ways to allow them to participate anonymously. So you could throw a poll out there, put a question out there where people could type things on their screen anonymously, and I actually got more participation from those type of audiences through those mechanisms. So you can get really creative with the webinar format and in some cases do things that are not even possible in person, such as increasing participation for some of the demographics. In terms of the size then, just to round out this discussion of what type of webinars and what do they look like, a couple of considerations for you if I just divide it up into that smaller group versus the larger group. So these things are true whether you're doing training, presentations, sales, demos, whatever. For the smaller group, a couple things just to reiterate what I mentioned and some other things. So for the microphones or the audio, typically they're going to be open, not on mute. You're going to have interactive dialogue, a lot of discussion and things like that. The session length itself, the webinar, can probably be a little bit longer because you will have that more direct interaction, and you'll use a decent amount of polling or feedback, and that's going to complement that interactive live discussion. One thing that we can't obviously demonstrate on the Blog Talk Radio, but if you were to see one of my webinars, you would notice that I do a lot of annotations on the screen, kind of the John Madden effect, right? And the reason for that is, again, to help the participants be focused. So as a facilitator, I use the annotations to draw attention to things, or if there's a diagram, to highlight certain parts of it. But what's really cool is a lot of the webinar tools allow the participants to also do annotations. And I work that into my webinars so that they are, again, forced to engage. It gives me feedback as a facilitator, and it makes sure that the points are getting across. So it's really nice in a small group environment to open up those capabilities and utilize that full breadth of capability. In a larger group environment, can't do as much of that stuff, so the mics are probably on mute and they have to raise their hand or buzz in to ask a question. They can ask questions probably through like a chat or a Q&A panel. The session length is probably going to be shorter just because you're not going to be able to have as much interaction. You won't have the attention span. And then you'll use a little bit heavier use of the polling and feedback because you're not going to be able to do shout-outs and stuff like that. And then finally, for the annotations, sometimes you can use a little bit of the participant annotations, but mainly it would be the facilitator using annotations. So the point of all this, I know I threw a lot at you, the point of all of it is, what are you really trying to do? And then from that, we could figure out what type of tool works best for you, what type of things you should be focused on doing, and how to design those webinar presentations.
Absolutely. One size does not fit all, and we need to make sure that we're setting this up correctly, because you are representing your company out there. It is recorded. It is part of, I guess, the web history, and it's important to go into these tools with a plan. You just don't want to fire up the webinar. In fact, the first time I did it, we mentioned one time about the technical difficulties and how you kind of have to use that. And then maybe that's a good lead in, some of the caveats of using a webinar tool, you know?
Yep, yes. Well, and it's a great point, Mike, because frankly, if you use the webinar tool wrong, you're probably better off not using it at all. I sat in on a presentation from a high-tech company that was intended to be a product announcement or a product explanation, if you will. It was done so poorly, I was wondering, you know, what is the credibility here? What, you know, is this? They're telling you about this great high-tech product, yet they can't even use a simple webinar tool in a way that is making sense. So it definitely can have a negative reflection on the presenter and on the company that you're representing. So it is not trivial. Like I said, you can't just take whatever you've been doing and then do it by webinar. You know, it's the classic case of death by PowerPoint. We've all sat through training sessions like that in person. Now take that effect and multiply it 10 times when you're in a webinar. It just gets worse, and it's much, much more difficult to participate in. There's going to be extra work to convert any material you have that you used to use in person, and that's okay, because the good news is that's going to have a long-term payback. You will be able to continue using that material. And the other good news is you don't have to start from scratch. Much of the material you're using, with some minor tweaks that are designed purposefully, can be used very effectively for webinars. If you are designing something from brand new for a webinar, that's a great opportunity to be real creative. So we do a lot of things like design homework into it or pre-work or other things, because we want to optimize the time on the webinar and yet get the full experience in terms of what somebody's supposed to do. So if you can give them something that they read or do prior to coming in, then they're more prepared for the actual webinar itself. And definitely the whole idea of interaction is critical. Designing interaction. So even if you're a salesperson giving a sales presentation, we all know how important it is to have, you know, the reflective questioning and kind of interactive dialogue. So design some things into it to where you ask the participants, you know, feed that back in your own words, or answer a poll about what I just showed you, or do a markup on the screen that reflects, you know, what you're thinking or how you would use this. Another couple things is definitely need to get properly trained on the tool and the use of the tool for the workshop. You can get some basic training from most of the providers on the way the tools work, and that's fine. What they really won't tell you is how do you put it all together with best practices to make the session as effective as possible. I compare it to, like, you know, trying to learn how to drive by reading the owner's manual of a vehicle. It's going to tell you what the things do, but it won't necessarily tell you how to go out and actually put it all together when you're on the road. So that's an important factor as well. And then finally, when you're doing webinars, I'll be honest with you, it's not necessarily easy at first. It's a multitasking environment. You really got to know the material, but also you got to know the medium. And so you're constantly, you know, if you're using it right, you're constantly switching things around. You're using different annotations. You're firing up polls. You're monitoring the audience. It can be very overwhelming at first, but with a little bit of practice and the right training, you can do it great, and it just comes second nature. It's no different than anything else. You need to learn how to use it and then try it, and you can be very successful at it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm always a big believer in get the proper advice, and Art definitely is able to help people on the call before you go in there. Get a little coaching and some training before you head out there onto the road, like Art's example there of getting in a car and just reading the owner's manual. I hope no one would do that, and the same thing with any tools. And I'll be honest, with my first experience a couple of years ago with a webinar, it was overwhelming because you start to sweat, you know, and you're talking to yourself too. That was one of the things that I found, because I'm used to talking to in sales in front of someone or an audience and getting that interaction. There is no interaction. I mean, no one's giving you exact feedback unless someone types in a question in, and it is awkward. So practice makes perfect, and I can't stress that enough. Plus, background noise. Make sure that you're in a quiet environment. You don't want any background noise, because that's something that also distracts your listeners. You almost have to be in a silent booth to make sure that you're getting your messaging across. That's for sure. So
yeah,
and one last thing.
I want to just build quickly on the one other point you were making there, Mike, is that a lot of, especially salespeople, and definitely if you're in any training role and things like that, or product or marketing, we build off of, we get energy off of our audience. And so it does require a certain additional level of being amped up, but at the same time, that's why I'm encouraging and why I'm saying it's so important to design those interactions, because you will then get the feedback, and you can get, then you won't be just talking to yourself, because it's a different environment. It's very frustrating.
It is. And for those that have never hosted a webinar, Big Brother is watching. I don't know if you can expand a little bit on that, or tell them a little bit more about how there's measurements of how you're paying attention to give them a little tip that think that people aren't listening,
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and this gets into some of the capabilities which we really don't have time to go into, but there are a number of standard things that are available in webinar tools, like annotations and polling and some recording capabilities and things. But what you can do that Mike's referring to is, if you want to make sure that you're delivering something where the participants are absolutely engaged, you can do things like track the polling questions. And I don't have a problem with telling people up front. In fact, I encourage that you tell people up front, look, we are going to be tracking these results. Now, we aren't necessarily giving a pass-fail per se. That's a different thing. But when people know that they are going to be measured, they will be more accountable. And so polling is something that can be used to not only give immediate feedback to the facilitator and make sure that the participants are learning, but it demands a higher level of concentration, and it allows you to see what the results are. Were we hitting the mark? Is there somebody that's out there that seems to be getting the polls wrong, and therefore maybe they're literally having a problem understanding or something? So it's really a good way for you to be able to focus in and find out how you can help people on an individual basis. The other one, I know another one you were alluding to as well, and that is in some of the webinar tools, it has something called attention tracking, where the facilitator can see if somebody has the webinar as their main application. So if somebody's drifted off doing email or something, I can see, I don't know what they're doing, but I can see that they're not in the webinar session, and I can gently, hint that, hey, I see a couple people drifting off. Let's come back, because I'm about to give you a question, or I'm about to do a poll, and sure enough, you'll see them quickly flip back. So it's that Big Brother aspect of it can be very positive for the participants, because it makes sure that they're engaged.
Absolutely. So, let's close this out here. We're almost at the end of our 30 minutes. Went by fast. I've learned a lot. What are some next steps for someone to jump in the water, in the shallow end, obviously, and get started a little bit, Art?
Yep. So there's a number of different webinar applications that are out there, and the key thing is to try to figure out which one would suit your needs. So really understanding what you're planning to do is important. There's trial versions that are available, with some of them available like on a 30-day basis with the full capability. Some of the webinar tools let you have like a limited number of people for an unlimited amount of time. But there's a variety of different ways of doing that. Another thing is to definitely try to plug yourself into additional resources for what to do or what not to do. And on that note, we do have a couple of upcoming events. One is going to be here in the Western New York area. If you're in this area here in the Rochester area, we're going to be doing a seminar mid-September, and we are going to also do a webinar that takes kind of the next steps of what to do, what not to do. And then last but not least, anybody that's listening to this either live or the recording, if you send an email to me, I'll send you out a guide to excellence in webinar presentations. Helps you with, like, what are the 4 top things to avoid doing, and what are the types of more detail about the types of capabilities to look for. So if you want to know about any of those things, or you have any other questions, just send an email to me, art@technicalsalesdevelopment.com. So again, it's art, A-R-T, at technicalsalesdevelopment.com. and we'll be glad to get you out that information and definitely include you on the mailing list for the upcoming webinar and seminar here in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Art, I learned a lot, and I really do appreciate your time, and I look forward to working with you. You're an excellent person and a full resource for anyone that needs technical sales development. Art is the person. He travels all over the world, so if you need any extra help, he definitely is the person to reach out to. So thanks again for everyone on the call, and thanks again for your time, Art, and I wish everyone well. Any closing remarks, Art?
No, I want to thank you for your time and everybody else's time, and when Mike says traveling around the world, oftentimes it's virtual, so keep that in mind.
True, true. All right, well, thanks again, and I wish good luck on your next sales call. Thank you.